Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Okay. So this just came out today, 2 hours ago, so I won't be posting this for a few days. But I am very excited. Love Geography Now videos, and the United Kingdom one is out. Preemptive like, the original link to the video from Geography Now, top of the description. Below that link to the Discord, would love to have you. My name is Connor if you're new. I like to learn about things and watch stuff. Let's go.
Hey Geography peeps, as you know, I'm American and I just got my Anglophone family reunion invite, so I guess I have to show up to be polite and all. Hi, Dad.
It's time to learn geography now!
Hey everyone, I'm your host Barbs. Get your Geography Now merch like this Geography Now t-shirt at geographynow.com. Not selling out if it's your brand. Well, here I am in the big crumpet, the big uck, the land of kings, queens, and in-betweens. At one point, a quarter of the world's population and land area was under their rule. Of course, such a story came with lots of complicated chapters, and when it comes to complication, usually it's best to have a person from the country come along and help out. And for this episode, I could not think of anyone better to speak on behalf of the UK than my go-to Brit. Many of you already know him. Come on in, ladies and gentlemen, say hello to Mr. J. Foreman.
Hi, hello.
Crossover.
Oh, thank you so much. I've always wanted to be on Geography Now.
We tell them how we met.
I think I started watching Geography Now back in the Belgium days. You accidentally stole a map from an episode of Map Men, and now we're the best of YouTube friends.
Yeah, I stole your map.
I've probably stolen more from elsewhere.
By the way, Jay, a lot has probably happened over the years. What have you been up to?
This?
Oh, yeah. You made something.
Yeah, I made one of these.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, he's really good.
Yeah, so let's talk about your country now. Shouts dideth we.
That is how we talk.
I didn't know it was going to be a J. Foreman and...
So, the UK today is very different from what it used to be. And no, we're not referencing how the island used to be connected to the rest of continental Europe via Doggerland.
And no, we're not referencing the Mesolithic Aaronsburgian hunter-gatherers.
Or the Neolithic agriculturalists and enormous stone transporting and solstice measuring peoples.
No, we're referencing a time later on when the entire island was just a mess of clans, chiefdoms, opposing monarchs, and outside monarchs trying to come in and out-monarch the said monarchs.
It wasn't until much later that the country actually completed unifying everything on the island of Great Britain, plus Northern Ireland, don't forget Northern Ireland, and all the overseas territories, don't forget the overseas territories, and crown dependencies. You could probably forget the crown dependencies.
Yeah, because there's like a whole other thing going on.
Yeah,
oh yeah, and you guys have a town called T.O.
Yeah, there's a place near here called Totter's Bottom.
I went to Field. Oh, and of course you can't forget
Very good, very good, excellent.
Cheers.
Actually, speaking of places in Britain, did you know that we've got some of the weirdest and hardest to pronounce places in the world?
Okay. Leicester, Fromey, Ruislip, Chiswick, Landfall.
Llanelli.
Oh yeah, that's Welsh, isn't it?
It is Welsh.
Oh,
those Welshes you can get.
Welshies, you can't trust them.
Well, in any case, let's look at the map, shall we?
First of all, the main chunk of what makes up the UK is Great Britain, located off the northwestern coast of the continental mainland of Europe, north of France, separated by the English Channel, and east of Ireland, separated by the Irish Sea to the east, as well as the North Sea, and to the North Atlantic. The island of Great Britain is made up of three constituent countries: England, which holds about 84% of the country's population, Scotland, which holds about 8%, and Wales at about 1.5%. From there, they also administer Northern Ireland, which doesn't exactly have an official political title. Some say it's a constituent country, some say it's a region or province, but to this day it lies across the Irish Sea on the northern section of the island of Ireland, making it their largest land border with any country. Outside of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, though, the UK has 3 crown dependencies and 14 overseas territories, 12 of which are small islands in the Caribbean, Atlantic, Indian, and Pacific Oceans, and 2 of them, Gibraltar and the sovereign bases of Akrotiri and Dhekelia, are small areas attached to the larger shared land masses of Spain and Cyprus. Keep in mind the crown dependencies of the Isle of Man, Guernsey, and Jersey are technically not considered part of the UK, but are still subject to the UK's defense and international representation. And finally, the British Antarctic Territory and its main base at Rothera is a section of Antarctica that does not have any actual sovereign status, as all countries are subject to the Antarctic Treaty, which states no one can colonize the continent. The entire domain that falls under the UK's sovereignty spans across 9 time zones. Anyway, back to the main island. This is where things take a twist. First off, keep in mind, each of the constituent countries of Scotland and Wales, as well as whatever you want to label Northern Ireland, has their own parliament system with a head called a First Minister. Whereas England does not have its own separate parliament, as they just use the same country capital's Westminster Palace building as the meeting place for all English elected constituent officials, since it's pretty much always been the spot used for them anyway, and they see no need to complicate things further. On paper, England has 48 counties, Scotland has 32 council areas, Wales has 22 principal areas, and Northern Ireland has 6 counties. However, keep in mind that many of these are disputed, people don't pay attention to them, and many might just refer to their traditional areas, which is another topic. In any case, the capital and largest city in Western Europe is London. After that, it's Manchester at number 2 and Birmingham at number 3. Also, keep in mind the city of London, or the city of
I don't know why I just figured Paris would have been bigger, but it's not clearly.
Manchester at number 2 and Birmingham at number 3. Also, keep in mind the city of London, or the City of London Corporation, has its own separate government, which is independent from the rest of the country. This means that the Lord Mayor of London is technically the highest ranking official in the UK after the monarch, even though the City of London in itself is just one small part of Greater London. London alone has 4 of the top 10 busiest airports in the country: Heathrow, Gatwick, Stansted, and Luton, whereas outside of the London area, Manchester International comes in at number 3 and Edinburgh International at number 6. Just on the east side of England lies the port of Felixstowe, the largest and busiest shipping port of the country. The country has a very extensive road and rail network, and otherwise, London's Waterloo and Victoria are the largest train stations, and the completion of the Channel in 1994 officially connected the UK to the rest of mainland Europe via France.
Except literally no one calls it the Channel ever.
I call it the Channel.
I do.
You don't. It's the Channel Tunnel, or the Eurostar, or Le Shuttle, or anything but Channel. No one says Channel.
Calling it Channel. So as you can see, when it comes to the administrative divisions, the UK is quite possibly the biggest nightmare in the world.
And keep in mind, we didn't even mention all the other confusing administrative levels like combined authority areas, metropolitan counties, lieutenancy areas, or lieutenancy areas, depending how you want to pronounce it, parishes, wards. It's a lot.
Yeah. To help a little bit more on understanding on how all these things actively work, we could mention the 650 constituency system, in which 650 small sections of the country get represented in the parliament with a representative.
It's so complicated. The way we do things in this country is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And if it is massively broke, still don't fix it.
Anyway, off of that note, the UK has a bicameral legislature consisting of the House of Commons and the House of Lords.
So the House of Commons is the one that you see on the telly, and the House of Lords is the big room next door where they wear robes, and it's weird.
And the wigs too, right?
Wigs sometimes, yeah.
They're appointed.
So there are 4 ways you can get into the House of Lords. One of them is by giving lots of money to the governing party, and then they sort of, as a...
This is important. This is important.
And the wigs too, right?
Wigs sometimes, yeah.
They're appointed.
So there are 4 ways you can get into the House of Lords. One of them is by giving lots of money to the governing party, and then they sort of, as a favour, make you a lord. But that's not officially how it works, so that's not what I said. The other way is if you're an expert in something like the law or the arts or beer. The other way is if you happen to be born with a dad who's already a hereditary peer.
So it can be hereditary.
It can be hereditary. And you're allowed to become a member of the House of Lords as long as you don't have any older brothers. Isn't it insane? Some British place names, just from looking at the name, you can tell which part of the country it's in. So, for example, if it's got a Celtic name, which means it has words like Tre, Loch, Bryn, and Aber, that means you're likely to find it in Wales. Or if it's got a Viking suffix, such as Thwaite, Thorpe, Kirk, or Bee, that means you're likely to find it in the north. And then there are the Anglo-Saxon place names, such as Ing, Ham, Bury, Ford, Port, and so on and so on. So the Viking suffix, such as Thwaite, Thorpe, Kirk, or Bee, that means you're likely to find it in the north. And then there are the Anglo-Saxon place names, such as Ing, Ham, Bury, Ford, Port, and so on and so on.
So you can actually tell which group of people influenced which area based off of the suffix of the name of the place.
Sort of, although that was probably more true hundreds of years ago, and now these days all the names get mixed up and they come up with new place names all the time.
Gotta have that Trotter's Bottom.
What about Muth?
Example, if it's got a Celtic name, just from looking at the name, as like.
What about Muth, like Falmouth or Portsmouth or
which
was probably more true hundreds of years ago.
Which area based off of the suffix of the name of the place.
Sort of, although that was probably more true hundreds of years ago, and now these days all the names get mixed up and they come up with new place names all the time.
Gotta have that Trotter's Bottom. So all of that brings us to the obvious topic. The UK is a constitutional monarchy.
Technically, the king is in charge, and it's his country and it's his laws, but how this practically works is he's just a ceremonial figurehead, and it's actually the government and the Prime Minister that make all the actual decisions.
But he could also step in if he wanted to.
Yeah, in theory, he could step in and say, I don't like this law, but he knows full well that if he tried that, there'd be an instant revolution and would set Buckingham Palace on fire.
You got another Oliver Cromwell situation. Jay did a lot of videos on this type of stuff. We'll just put an annotation.
So wait, it's essentially, so he does have the power to do things, but if he did, then they would just get rid of that power.
Check out his videos. Long story short, it wasn't always this way. In fact, the UK's history is more like the combined histories of the three constituent countries of Scotland, England, and Wales, plus a little bit of Northern Ireland, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, even though the UK is a country, like the bits that make it up are also called countries.
Yeah, there's no simple way to condense this whole history.
Let's try anyway.
I had to answer the phone, guys, and I didn't catch a lot of that anyway right here, so I need to watch it again anyway.
No simple way to condense this whole history.
Let's try anyway.
Ancient beaker culture.
Celts arrived and split into the Britons, Gaels and Picts.
Romans failed to conquer the Picts. They build Hadrian's Wall.
Romans leave, in come the Germanic tribes.
Scotland splits into 4 kingdoms.
Egbert becomes the first Saxon king.
And then the Anglo-Saxons split into 7 kingdoms.
Anglo-Saxon, by the way, is where the name England comes from. Cornwall falls to Wessex, but keeps its language and culture.
Meanwhile, Wales was made up of many kingdoms, but the largest are Gwynedd, Powys, and Dyfed.
Vikings come in, raid much of the Hebrides Island and Isle of Man.
Scots and Picts join to create the Kingdom of Alba.
Danish Vikings come in and create the Danelaw. This is also how lots of Danish words crept their way back into modern English, such as leg, window, and yes, even ransack, which was exactly what the Danes were doing.
Anglo-Saxon Ethelsin fights against them and becomes the first king of England. Meanwhile, in the 11th century, Griffith ap Llewellyn becomes the only king that ruled over all of Wales, but then it is quickly killed by one of his own people.
William of Normandy takes over England, and thus begins the Norman dynasty.
Angevin Empire via the House of Plantagenets begins.
Crusades! Oops.
Oh, that's so confusing. The Angevin part.
And thus begins the Norman dynasty.
Angevin
Must learn.
Empire via the House of Plantagenets begins.
Crusades! Oops. Richard Lionheart plays a huge role in this.
King John is terrible, and then his barons force him to sign the Magna Carta.
1284. Edward I conquers Wales and integrates it into England, but they maintain their language and culture.
Alexander III of Scotland dies, and 14 rivals claim succession to the throne.
14th century. Charles IV of France dies with no heir, so Edward III was eligible through his mum, but the French were like, hell no, and elected Prince Philip of Valois, and hence began the 100 Years' War.
Yes, this is when the Joan of Arc thing happened.
Edward III dies, many claimants to the throne rise up, and thus begins the War of the Roses.
16th century Tudor dynasty begins, and thus all that crazy Henry VIII stuff goes down.
You know the history, divorced.
I always forget. Oh my god, this is so freaking confusing too. The Henry VIII. But I always forget which one is Longshanks, is the Braveheart king. Is it Edward the First, the second, or the third?
Joan of Arc thing happened.
Edward III
He looks kind of like that, so I'm guessing.
dies, many claimants to the throne rise up, and thus begins the War of the Roses.
16th century Tudor dynasty begins, and thus all that crazy Henry VIII stuff goes down.
You know the history, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived.
It's cute. It rhymes.
Meanwhile, in 1585, the British take their first stab at colonizing what is now Virginia in the USA, which eventually evolved into the 13 colonies.
There I am.
Meanwhile, the East India Company begins shortly after.
Elizabeth I's rule leads to the Mary Queen of Scots thing and the Spanish Armada.
17th century, Elizabeth I dies. Closest relative is James VI of Scotland, and he becomes ruler, hence joining Scotland and England for the first time, becoming the first monarch to rule over the entire island of Great Britain.
Conspirators try to assassinate him and blow up Parliament, aka the Guy Fawkes thing.
Charles I and Parliament have tensions, and thus begins the English Civil War.
Oliver Cromwell becomes Lord Protector after dissolving the monarchy, but after he dies, the monarchy is restored with Charles II.
Man, you guys really went back to that monarchy thing fast. In the 17th century, Scotland unsuccessfully attempts colonies in Panama and Nova Scotia and has a...
Guys, I feel like it was like all right, we made our point, you know. So this is what I feel why. It's because when Cromwell went in, they realized, I think you realize how much harder... You're getting rid of one established thing only to have another somewhat king-like guy take it over. And so, you know, let's make it easy. We made our point. Go back to the king that we beheaded, his son, and, you know, have some concessions on both sides, right?
In the 17th century, Scotland unsuccessfully attempts colonies in Panama and Nova Scotia and has an economic crisis.
1707, the union between Scotland and England is finalised.
Queen Anne dies, ending the House of Stuart, and in comes the House of Hanover.
Wars, and more expensive wars. Great Britain taxes colonies to try and make up for the debt.
Colonies aren't happy, which leads to the War of Independence for America.
The Industrial Revolution.
Let's just pass over that whole chapter. Captain James Cook swings by Australia, New Zealand, and hey, let's establish some more penal colonies.
Napoleonic
Fine,
Wars.
Hawaii.
East India Company is met with revolt and leads to a full takeover of India in 1858.
Berlin Conference split up areas that European powers would administer in Africa.
World War I, 1921, land grabs from the crumbling German and Ottoman empires resulted in the height of the territorial rule for the UK.
1922, Ireland breaks away.
World War II, the whole Winston Churchill and the Battle of the Blitz stuff happened.
Afterwards, one by one, the former territories.
It is so insane how you could almost go from Singapore to Pretoria to the tip of South Africa and never leave. Obviously, you have Iran, Persia, right? But and then I don't think you have. Still, it's so insane.
German and Ottoman empires resulted in the height of the territorial rule for the UK.
1922, Ireland breaks away.
World War II, the whole Winston Churchill and the Battle of the Blitz stuff happened.
Afterwards, one by one, the former territories got their independence.
The Commonwealth of Nations is established.
Joins NATO.
Paramilitary violence in Northern Ireland.
Sorry about that. Joins the European Economic Community, which was like a predecessor to the EU.
Monetarism policies are enacted under the Margaret Thatcher years.
Falkland Islands War.
2008 global financial crisis followed by a Scottish referendum ending in remaining part of the UK.
2016, the UK votes at nearly 52% to leave the EU.
Queen Elizabeth II, longest reigning British monarch, passes away. Her son King Charles III is coronated.
Crowned.
So there you go, an oversimplified outline of the thousands of years of like 70, 20, 10% British, Scottish, Welsh history all jammed into a cheesy YouTube skit with minimal props and slapstick humor.
The thing you'll hear most often from people who love the royal family is how good it is for tourism, despite the fact that if we got rid of the monarchy, we could turn Buckingham Palace into a really expensive museum.
But then there wouldn't be a monarch to like fantasize about the fairy tale monarch prince.
True. I could go inside Buckingham Palace and it could be a museum. Okay, get rid of the No, all right. I don't have an opinion there, okay?
Says king queen stuff, you know? It's like.
But then maybe King Charles could retrain and get a different job as a chartered quantity.
Yeah, but it takes away the whole fantasy aspect. We think of monarchs as like magical creatures. That's
True.
the problem.
Despite an increasing number of Republicans.
Okay, I
Monarchs as like magical creatures. That's the problem!
Despite an increasing number of Republicans, which in this country means people vying for a republic against the idea of a monarchy, most Brits are okay with the royal family. It has a unique role as both representing longevity and tradition and tabloid fodder.
I don't know, I really do think it does have a lot to do with tourism. Sure. And then we come in. Yeah.
Whereas when Brits go on holiday within our own country, we like to go to the seaside. Places like Southend.
The longest pleasure pier in the world. And speaking of which, we got a guy who kind of saved a lot of people over there, and he's going to do the famous places segment. Come on in, Mr. Tommy Boy.
So, other than Southend Pier, the longest pleasure pier in the world, which I did save by peeing on when it was on fire, true story. Other places you need to visit are London, obviously, St Paul's Cathedral, Buckingham Palace, the London Eye, Tower of London, Tower Bridge, the House of Parliament, Big Ben, red telephone boxes, of which many have now been repurposed, police boxes for you Doctor Who fans, Stonehenge, Sea Henge, which isn't even a henge, Silbury Hill, the Royal Ascot and its many funny hats, Bath with its Roman baths, the Jurassic Coast, including Durdle Door, the Ammonites and Fossil Beach in Lyme Regis, Windsor Castle, the Shambles in York, the Peak and Lake Districts, the Eden Project. Next, we're going to do Wales. Many castles including Carnarvon, Conwy, Caerphilly, Cardiff, Snowdonia with Mount Snowdon, which you can actually go up on a train, Penryn, Slate Quarry, the underground trampoline park in Cleckwood, Dobby the House Elf's grave, where people keep leaving their socks. So next, we're going to go up to Scotland. First, you have to start with Edinburgh, with its Royal Mile, Calton Hill, the castles, St Kilda, Orkney and Lewis for Neolithic stone circles, Shetland for ponies, Isle of Skye, Loch Ness, what I personally think is the coolest thing in the whole of the UK, Fingal's Cave. It's on the island of Stafford. You can walk in the cave, you can walk on it, on top. There are puffins everywhere, and when you're on the boat, there are whales and dolphins swimming next to you. We jump across to Northern Ireland, which you can actually see from Scotland, fun fact, and we start off with the Giant's Causeway, Carrick-a-Reed Rope Bridge, the Titanic Museum, the Dark Hedges, and now for the overseas territories, the Gibraltar Rock with its Barbary apes, Jersey, where you can see some cows, Guernsey, Guernsey and Alderney, some of the most fortified islands on Earth, and go to the Isle of Man to see the TT motorbike races. I mean, overall, I'm so glad I got to do this trip. Give me some love.
It was so fun.
Had so much fun.
Whew, that was a lot to process, and we didn't even scratch the surface.
Or the scratchy bottom.
But alas, we must move on to the next segment of this ever-complicated nation, the physical geography.
Jesus.
Now, when discussing the landscape of the UK, most people, they just kind of like default in their minds to the typical hilly green pastures
wrong with
or
it.
the Scottish Highlands and just like a lot of rain.
And yes, that does apply to much of the country, but if we're going to be technical, you can also include coconut tree-lined atolls, frozen glaciers, erupting volcanoes, beaches with penguins, and much more.
Let's look at the map to explain, shall we?
First of all, the main part of the country, Great Britain and Northern Ireland, are located in the western parts of the Eurasian plate, with many mini fault lines feeding through, especially in the island of Great Britain. The most general way to divide the island is with the T's X line, which is an imaginary
Ooh, wait, what?
located in the west
Explain, shall we?
First of all, the main part of the country, Great Britain and Northern Ireland, are located in the western parts of the Eurasian plate, with many mini fault lines feeding through, especially in the island of Great Britain. The most general way to divide the island is with the T's X line,
You guys get earthquakes?
which is an imaginary diagonal boundary that separates the lowlands with the highland regions in the north and west. This geological formation is also what contributes to some hot spring areas along the line, most notably in areas like Derbyshire and the city of Bath. The most notable fault line, though, would be the Great Glen Fault up in Scotland, which splits like a scar through the Scottish Highlands, which are the highest part of the country and also hold the tallest peak of the country, Ben Nevis. This fault line also creates long, deep rift lakes like the famous Loch Ness, which is the most voluminous lake in the entire country.
Guys, is this also the other rifts? The same reason for the locks? Is that the same? Is the territory of different clans in Scotland, which are also very kind of long and diagonally down, like thin and long? And you think, why? That doesn't seem like a very protected area. But is it because they're all in these sort of glens or in these in between,
Holding nearly double the amount of water, famous Loch Ness, which is the most voluminous lake in the entire country, holding nearly double the amount of water in all the lakes of England and Wales combined. If you want to find the lake with the largest surface area, though, you'd have to go to Northern Ireland and visit Loch Ness. If you want to find the longest river, though, many people might mistakenly say it's the Thames, which, although it is an important river that goes through London, it is not the longest. The longest is actually the Severn River that starts in the Highlands of Wales and meanders through England and empties into Bristol Bay. In any case, if we want to be completely well-rounded on the sovereign domain of the UK, you could include everything from the tropical
Bermuda?
beaches of Caribbean island territories like Anguilla and Turks and Caicos. Montserrat Island actually had an enormous volcanic eruption in 1995 that destroyed the entire southern part of the island, including the former capital Plymouth. The South Georgia and South Sandwich Islands are the coldest parts of the UK's territories with permanent glaciers.
South Georgia, Shackleton. What is that island where he had to leave Frank Wild in charge while he sailed with 3 people like 800 miles to South Georgia? Elephant Island? That'd be really cool to visit and see where they camped. They had to stick around for like 100 and something days.
And protected wildlife breeding grounds. The South Sandwich Islands are pretty volcanically active too, especially Mount Belinda, Mount Curry, and Mount Michael, which create an eerie sight of fire and ice when they erupt. In any case, these are all just examples that show the range of what you can naturally find in areas that fall within the sovereignty of the UK.
Now, despite being a nation smaller in area than the country of Guinea in West Africa, the UK today stands with the 6th largest national economy by nominal GDP in the world.
We used to be number 5. Many factors attributed to this prosperity growth, such as the Industrial Revolution, or the fact that we were an island isolated, but not too isolated from continental Europe, with access to multiple naval trade routes that we dominated and protected.
Now, this is where I usually take my triple shot espresso break and Noah fills in for the rest of the segment. However, since I'm here in the UK, I guess I'll have to switch things up and do an English breakfast tea break.
And isolated, but not too isolated from continental Europe, such as the Industrial Revolution, or the fact that we were an island isolated, but not too isolated from continental Europe.
That is the key to British success, in my opinion, and I think a key to a lot of American success on a bigger scale with the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. And but the fact that you had such a powerful navy, and you're near Europe and can meddle in affairs there. And also, in order for people to invade, they have to get past your navy and then do a seaborne invasion. Just such a good combo.
With access to multiple naval trade routes that we dominated and protected.
Now, this is where I usually take my triple shot espresso break and Noah fills in for the rest of the segment. However, since I'm here in the UK, I guess I'll have to switch things up and do an English breakfast tea break.
Coming right up. Here you go, take this.
Oh, wow, this is a thing that you guys do.
Sugar? You're getting
that much. Okay. I mean, it's not bad, it's good, but is there any way to make it stronger?
It's as strong as it needs to be. He's f***ing drinking it. Can I try some? I don't hate it as much as I should.
You don't hate it as much as... Yes! America and the UK join forces!
All right.
Mixing tea and coffee, or tea and espresso. Interesting.
The UK. Let's get
Noah.
to it, okay? So historically, many of the parts that made up the UK followed some brutal and ineffective economic practices. For example, people were expected to stay and work in their home parishes even if there was no work. Those that wandered off to find work elsewhere were deemed vagabonds, and if caught were subject to things like whippings or being put into stocks. Yeah, that didn't work out so well. Eventually though, over time, many parts of what are now England fell into a system of mercantilism, or a policy that attempted to maximize tariff exports with quotas while minimizing imports. That kind of worked, but as you know, most of the world hates tariffs, so eventually they had to drop that system in 1840. The Industrial Revolution was without a doubt a game changer that launched the UK into global dominance. Things like the sewing machine, steam-powered engines, and turbines, the telegraphs revolutionized the entire manufacturing system.
Telegraph. Is that the first instant communication?
Steam-powered engines and turbines, the telegraph.
If it is, I think this might be the most important invention in human history. Okay? I might be wrong. Let me know. But I think about how much of a game changer that is in everything. Military, economic stuff, just trade.
Revolutionized the entire manufacturing system, where now things were made by machine instead of by hand. Every region had their distinct industry and resources. Newcastle focused on shipbuilding, from Manchester cotton, Middlesbrough iron and steel, Scotland wool and linen. Telegraphs could now send messages from the UK to India in hours. You could arrive to a destination in a few hours via train instead of days by horse and carriage. With this new advancement,
So it wasn't instant. Okay, sorry.
Arrive to a destination in a few hours via train instead of days by horse and carriage. With this new advancement and advantage, the UK changed their strategy, becoming a hegemonic naval powerhouse while subsidizing and delegating specific regions for private trading companies to monopolize off of. For example, the Muscovy Company was in charge of trading with Russia. The East India Company took over the Indian Ocean, and the Hudson Bay Company was in charge of Canada. Granted, much of their economic activity was also riddled with labor from enslaved African peoples, even though it was never recognized in British law. Most of the about 2.5 million people were transported to the Caribbean, the second most popular destination after Brazil, to work on mostly sugar plantations between the 17th and 19th centuries. Eventually, slavery was abolished in 1807 with the Slave Trade Act. However, in practice, it still went on for over 2 more decades until the Slave Abolition Act was passed in 1833. Of course, this was a dark moment of history for the UK. Eventually, those sugar plantation islands would gain independence and form new nations like Jamaica, Barbados, and most of the Lesser Antilles Islands. Overall, you can see how the story of industrialization mixed with naval trade were key factors. And speaking of naval activity, you can occasionally find things like gray seals and basking sharks in the waters around the UK. And to talk more about the wildlife, here's Gary Harlow. You look a lot like Caleb.
I'm back! You can't get rid of me and my amazingly accurate Aussie accent. So first, let's focus on Great Britain. Today there are 14 national parks, 9 in England, 3 in Wales, and 2 in Scotland. There aren't many large mammals found on the island. Today, the largest native mammal is the red deer. Most of the predators like wolves and bears were hunted to extinction centuries ago. Those bearskin caps worn by the Queen's Guard were actually made from Canadian black bear pelts. As a temperate climate zone, reptiles are not very common. Only 3 native species of lizard exist, and all snakes except the European adder are non-venomous. The national animals of the UK all make no sense. For England, it's the lion, which is not even native to the European continent, let alone
Unicorn,
the UK.
dragon.
Whereas for Scotland, it's the unicorn, and Wales is the Welsh dragon, which
I always bring that up, how, you know, I feel like if you have a national animal, it should be from, like, what if Japan's national, or like, imagine, I don't know, South Korea's national plant being like a cactus. Yeah.
which haven't been discovered yet, but I'm on it. Most people will say that the English bulldog is a very iconic animal that epitomizes the British spirit. Otherwise, if we are discussing the overseas territories abroad, the wildlife spectrum expands to a wide range that includes things like flamingos and iguanas in Turks and Caicos, to elephant seals and macaroni penguins of the...
They're huge, guys. I saw a YouTube video of one, like, slamming on a car. Oh,
South Georgia, and
Beefy
South
boy.
Sandwich Islands, as they are a very popular breeding ground for various species.
I guess that's it.
I guess I'll go back into the blackness now. I fade out. Obscurity is where I go. Where will he go next?
Thank you, Gary. Definitely not Caleb Harlow. Well, as you can see, the ocean has played a huge role in the UK story, whether it be the naval trading routes or the fishing industry. To talk more about the food of the UK, here's one of our
Why do you guys
trading routes or
always have mashed peas with your
the fishing industry? To talk more about the food of the UK, here's one of our British geography peeps, Rob.
Hey, what's going on, guys? So it's my section now. Noah, I'm coming for you. But Britain tends to have a reputation, particularly among the rest of Europe, for having dull, bland, flavourless food. But you know what? I would say that's not the case. Nah, it's just we enjoy more cosy food and we do have flavour. For one, the most popular dish in Britain by some distance is a curry. Most notably is the chicken tikka masala, which wasn't even invented in India, claimed to be invented by a Pakistani in Glasgow. The dish we're most particularly proud of has to be the full English. You know, your breakfast, the eggs, your bean, bacon, sausage, black pudding,
what is that?
shredded tomatoes, and mushrooms. Otherwise, some of the top
Oh, that's a full Scottish with some haggis and tatty scones. What's a tatty scone? Oh, this? Mushrooms is a great addition. Beans are nice. They don't look like baked beans, but
bacon, sausage, black pudding, shredded tomatoes, and mushrooms. Otherwise, some of the top dishes you might encounter on a visit to the UK are things like Yorkshire pudding, bangers
so
and
good.
mash, Marmite. But if you do put it on toast, you got to put it lightly. You can't overdo it. Lancashire hot pot, toad in the hole, Welsh rarebit, Cornish pasties, Scotch egg, beef Wellington, shepherd's pie, steak and kidney pie, pie and mash with jellied eels, which is an East London Cockney delicacy. We love our meat pies. And of course, you cannot visit the UK without having our most famous dish, fish and chip.
the only one I didn't recognize is...
And mushrooms. Otherwise, some of the top dishes you might encounter on a visit to the UK are things like Yorkshire pudding, bangers and mash, Marmite. But if you do put it on toast, you got to put it lightly. You can't overdo it.
Lancashire hot pot. What's this, guys? Is that like scalloped potatoes over a meat dish?
Lancashire hot pot. Okay, without having our most famous dish, fish and chip. Whitby is known for having some of the best fish and chips in the country. For dessert, you might want to try something like a Eton mess, a Bakewell tart, sticky toffee pudding, trifle, and so much more. I hope you guys come and have a bite. See you in the UK. Look out for Rob Peters.
Thank you, Rob.
Hey, Noah, he said he's coming for you. What do you say to that?
We'll see. Well, that's all I got for you all today. I will catch you on the next one. Back to you, Barbs and Jay.
Thank you. That was awesome. You did a great job.
We just had a whole section about British food and you didn't mention crumpets.
Oh.
Gotta have I'll get you a crumpet. Hang on.
Oh, okay. This is a crumpet. Is that butter? Mm-hmm.
I thought it was supposed to be the clotted cream. Clotted cream?
Butter. I approve.
I just had a stroke.
Demographics. Okay, now.
Question is, what does it mean to be British? Simply, beans on toast.
A British person is a Greggs sausage roll.
Knowing the difference between a cheeky Nando's and spoons.
Welcome to Wales. Hey! We actually are a country. We have a language. It's the rugby, the communities, and the sites, as you can see.
Never chwiliachen on the gay. On the hard on the gallon. Where and the why?
For me,
I'm sorry.
For me, a Scottish person is someone who has broad, thick accent that is barely recognisable.
Iron Brew, The Proclaimers, Still Game, Haggis. This is our Wee Hill and Glen.
Polish breakfast on a Saturday morning and irony.
You should have a Sunday roast in a pub on Sunday.
I hope I don't sound like disrespectful. I like trying to say things.
Of any background, and everyone has a voice, everyone can say what they want.
Bloody brilliant at queuing.
We could be passively, aggressively polite.
Someone who loves to complain about the weather.
Complain about the weather, complain about the football, even when they win.
My thing I think that relates to all British people is the fact that we created all these sports and yet we're so bad at all of them.
Uniform, the benches for the year 6, biff and chip.
Someone from the UK is very self-deprecating. We love to take the piss.
Kind of like licorice all sorts. Everyone is mixed up with different things, but it's kind of like a big family that kind of argues with each other.
So what is a person from the UK? Well, I mean, that question already in itself kind of has a little bit of a title dilemma in it. Sometimes it's hard to even give a demonym for the people living here, and for many of the people, and depending on the area, the title British might not even be considered applicable.
Yeah, Scottish and Welsh people will typically tell you that they are Scottish and Welsh first. People on the Isle of Man are Manx, and all those penguins in South Georgia are... But for what it's worth, there's so much that goes into the concept of identity. When you break down the typical person that comes from the UK, it's not an easy question to answer.
But what we can attempt to break down is the ethnic makeup of the country in the demographics graph. Henceforth, let's do it.
For one, the UK has just over 68 million people, and as of 2023 is speculated to now have the third largest population in Europe, just surpassing France. When it comes to ethnic makeup, it's a little complicated to come by, but according to the most recent data from the Office of National Statistics, it is reported that the largest group are the white British peoples at somewhere around 87% of the country. This category is pretty broad, however. The office designates white into subgroups of white British, which includes Scottish and Welsh, Irish, Irish traveler, and whites of other nationalities. The remaining 13-ish% are made up of other non-white ethnic backgrounds, the largest being Asian British peoples at somewhere around 7% of the country. The majority come from South Asian countries like India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. About 3% are black British, mostly from Caribbean and West African backgrounds, and around 2% identify as ethnically mixed individuals, and around 1% identify with other groups.
The UK uses the
I'd be curious to see a similar pie chart of the religion.
G plug outlet, and they drive on the left side of the road, and fun fact, it's because of the jousting thing, I believe?
Sort of. So no one really knows why, but one theory is that when medieval jousting happened, you used to hold the sword in your right hand, so it made sense to pass on the left.
The majority of the UK uses the British pound sterling as its currency, sometimes called quid.
That's right.
Except in certain overseas territories, they may use other regional currencies. And that brings us to another quirky aspect of the UK, units of measurement.
So the UK was, of course, the birthplace of the famous imperial system. However, over the past few decades, the UK has been begrudgingly transitioning partially to metric.
And the choice of units to use is absolutely insane. For example, speed,
miles per hour,
temperature,
centigrade.
Get to weight.
Or weight.
If the subject is a person, you can use stone or pounds, but everything else kilos and grams.
For distance.
If it's long distance, like on the road, we use miles, unless if you're running, then it's kilometers, but if measuring a person, use feet and inches. Any other object, though, meters and centimeters.
For volume.
Liters and milliliters, unless it's beer or milk when we use pints, but only cow's milk, not plant milk, in which case they use pints, but pints that are a little bigger than American pints. Yeah, that's a thing.
That's a thing.
Although there's technically no official language, the country's de facto national language is, of course, English, or technically modern English, which is incredibly different from Old English. And during the 16th century, Shakespearean times, an early version of the modern style of English we know today started to evolve.
Thank you, Shakespeare.
And this, of course, brings us to the famous British versus American English scenario.
The spelling subtleties are minor. Brits tend to spell words that are more similar to their Latin and Germanic origins, whereas Americans spell things more phonetically. Otherwise, some words are just completely different, such as apartment,
flat,
fries,
chips, crisps,
truck,
lorry,
gas,
petrol,
cookie,
biscuit,
aluminum,
rubbish bin,
yard,
garden,
sidewalk,
pavement,
road
surface,
candy,
sweets,
faucet,
tap,
spigot,
tap,
flashlight,
torch,
oatmeal,
porridge.
But I do admit I like porridge better because it reminds me of fairy tales from childhood.
Yeah, true.
Oatmeal. Porridge.
Sorry, I just got way too excited.
But I do admit I like porridge better because it reminds me of fairy tales from childhood.
I know, just try saying the word porridge and not being just a little bit more happy.
Porridge, it's like the Goldilocks and the Three Bears.
Porridge.
And don't even get me started on the accents. In fact, it's speculated that the UK has the largest variation of accents in a single language of any country in the world. Somewhere around 40 to 50, I believe.
It is nuts. Like, if you think about just how small our islands are, and yet the accents have remained really resilient. The two cities of Liverpool and Manchester, only 30 miles apart, they sound completely different.
Otherwise, the UK also has regionally recognized native Celtic-based minority languages.
For example, Cornish is spoken in Cornwall by about 4 people, and Scottish Gaelic is spoken in Scotland, and by far the biggest of these surviving Celtic languages is Welsh.
There are even Welsh TV channels and shows, radio stations, and almost all road signs are posted in Welsh and English in Wales.
Each of these languages play a vital role to the cultures of their respective communities.
Religion! Now this is an interesting one because for most...
I think Welsh will only grow in popularity in Wales. I don't know, and I think that's... Jesus Christ, it just felt like something like stung my... I'm going crazy. With the obviously the Weatherman famous YouTube video, Lynn with Gokuk. But it's just it's sort of taken on a it's like that place with the really strange spelling. And I feel like that'll stick around.
Also, the UK's history, there's always been kind of like a complication when it came to religious affairs and leadership.
After the Church of England renounced papal authority from the Catholic Church in 1534, things got tricky. It was kind of like,
"Oh heavens, our dear monarch doth died. Who shalt beeth next in line? F."
It's insert name of next to kin. But here's the problem. They're Catholic.
Jolly toddlywonkles, no!
Let's burn things. That seemed to solve problems.
Burn! And that's like how 28% of their domestic wars started.
in any case, the country is technically a Christian country. Actually, it's technically a theocracy where the crown gets its power from God, long story, and a majority of them hold religion to more of a traditional role, mostly reserved for national festivals, traditions, and even schools and politics.
With all that said and done, it's very important to also highlight the
festivals, traditions, and even
COE bishops get to sit in the House of Lords.
schools and politics.
With all that said and done, it's very important to also highlight the immigrant and non-European communities that make up a very notable demographic of the UK as well.
The black community dates back to the 17th century, when attendants and servants were brought over, such as John Blank during the Tudor dynasty, who was paid about 16 pence a day for his trumpeting skill. Most of the enslaved black people were brought to the Caribbean, not Great Britain, so the black British community stayed relatively small and was mostly confined to Liverpool. It wasn't until the mid-20th century when communities from the Caribbean and West Africa started to set up communities over here.
The UK also has the oldest Chinese community in Europe, arriving in the 19th century, followed by other Asian groups like Indians and Arabs.
Basically, no matter who you are or what you are, everyone born and raised in the UK will have a common understanding of a certain set of values and customs unique to the UK. For one, the schooling system.
Oh, this is a weird one.
Yeah, so you might have got hints of what it's like from the Harry Potter films and books. Uniforms are worn not only to show school identity, but also to foster a sense of unity and equality.
And you can't make fun of the kids that wear bad clothes because it's like they're all wearing the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody can, well, you can still bully people.
Also, like, if you
not on clothes.
Education is a huge part of our culture. English, maths, that's right, maths, not maths.
You say maths.
You say maths.
Not mathematics.
And science and even physical education are compulsory subjects for every stage until the GCSE exams, and compulsory education ends at age 18.
Yeah, and you have that college is another thing you guys have, but it's like you're...
Well, right, so the word college is for older children, it's for teenagers. Say maths.
Not mathematics.
And science and even physical education are compulsory subjects for every stage until the GCSE exams, and compulsory education ends at age 18.
Yeah.
They can then take sixth form or A-levels.
Yeah, and you have that college is another thing you guys have, but it's like you're...
Well, right, so the word college is for older children, it's for teenagers who've chosen to study something very specific.
Yes, yeah.
Whereas in America, it's just you call college what we call university.
It's where we get wasted because we're saying we're studying, but we're not. Another unique trait of the UK's social atmosphere is the fact that since it is a constitutional monarchy, much of the country has a deep tie to the traditions related to said monarchy.
The inner core of the royal family today has about 50 or so members that are either descended or married into the House of Windsor.
Guys, let me know if I'm wrong. Isn't this still the House of Hanover, but because of World War I, they changed it to Windsor? Or am I wrong?
About half of them actually carry out royal duties, which usually include diplomatic missions and being the face of the UK.
Whatever you want to make of that. Outside of the royal family, of course, many noblemen were appointed leadership roles over certain areas, and today you can still even find many people that are descended from these lesser ranked individuals that had ties to the monarchs.
Well, you can, but you have to go to the very posh public schools, which, by the way, is what we call what you call private schools.
Right.
You're likely to run into people who say, oh, I'm actually 718th in line to the throne because my third father once removed was the 13th Duke and Duchess of Wyndham. Sometimes you'll find heirs to the throne where you least expect it. For example, did you know that Olympians...
If someone told me that, I would be speechless. It would be kind of cool, but I'd also be like, that's great. Sorry. All right. Hey, I'm the... That's like something that if it came up naturally in conversation, but if you just like come out and say it, it's like, okay.
Duke and Duchess of Wyndham. Sometimes you'll find heirs to the throne where you least expect it. For example, did you know that Olympian Zara Phillips is the Queen's granddaughter?
No, I did not know that. But we can learn more about the sport of the UK with art, with the sports part.
Sport part.
The sport part.
Alright guys, I'm back. Let's get athletic. And the UK is quite the contender. They have nearly 1,000 medals in the Olympics, and nearly 300 of which are gold. The UK is the father of many types of sports. Rugby, cricket, yes, even soccer or football. And hey, for all you Brits that are criticizing us Americans for calling it soccer, we got the word from you. You invented it. It came from the word association football. So it's kind of your fault. Although
we call it soccer here, all right? You get it, all right? It's not soccer, we call it soccer.
The concept of playing a game where you kick a ball around has been around since the ancient times. The modern version of what we call football was started in the UK in the 19th century using inflated pig bladders. I wonder how they got started with that. They're just like, they're eating some bacon and then they're like, oh, that looks kind of inflatable, you know? So far, England has won one World Cup in 1966 against West Germany. And it was in the iconic...
I bet you it started as some sort of just like family like messing around like entertaining the kids or something like that, and just like the uncle or a dad just grabbed it and look at this and blew it up and just like here, like boom, like hit it to them, and then they probably played with it, and then soccer became
Wembley Stadium that has since been torn down due to infrastructure problems, and it was buried under a huge grass mound. Also, the trophy was stolen, but found by Pickles the dog. True story. Either way, football is such a huge part of the UK's identity, and they could talk about it forever. They even have a subculture of hooligans, or the obnoxious football fans that like always get drunk and start fights and beat each other up. It's almost like a whole other sport itself, and it's equally entertaining to watch, like drunken MMA, right? Yeah. Otherwise, the modern form of rugby or rugby union was invented in the town of Rugby, where it got its name from. However, many will say rugby is actually descended from the Welsh game Cynapin, which is why today some of the best rugby players come from Wales, and it is a huge part of their national identity. Cricket was invented in South England in the 1500s and is one of the most long-winded sports that can last days to finish. Scotland is also a hub of inventing sports. The modern version of golf was also started in Scotland in the 16th century, and water polo in the 19th century. Scotland is also most noted for their Highland Games, where a bunch of people in kilts compete in a series of strength-based events like the caber toss, Scottish hammer throw, and the weight over bar toss. Oh, by the way, I did a DNA test, came back 48% Scottish.
Thought you were Polish.
Yeah, so a lot less Polish than what I thought.
What? I mean, it makes sense though.
Don't take me in.
It makes sense, the gingery.
The ginge.
The
I'm
gingery.
Scottish. I should have known. In Northern Ireland, it's not uncommon to see Gaelic football and hurling being played, native to the island. The UK is also known for their weird and wacky sports and competitions people loving taking part in, such as the Cooper Hill cheese rolling race thing, tar barrel racing, toe wrestling, shin kicking. Let's do that one.
We'll do it after this.
Pancake racing, the stinging nettle eating contest. Yeah, I used to get stung by those things all the time when I was a kid. Like, I cannot imagine eating those things. Gravy wrestling. These are weird. They even have a gurning contest, which is where, like, in order to win, you have to make, like, the ugliest face possible. Like this. In any case, that's all I got for you. Cheerio, toodle pop, jolly good, crumbly wrinkles, old chap, and whatever. I'm gonna get this ginger's gonna skedaddle out of here. Toodaloo.
Thank you, Art. Jay, what are some just of the biggest, most notable traditions you've experienced living here?
The day after Christmas, we call it Boxing Day, the 26th of December. It's an extension of the holiday, so you get yet another day off work, and there's also a lot of football going on and lots of great stuff on the telly.
I thought that was a day where you box each other because you're fighting over cheap prices at the grocery store.
Yeah, that's what I thought. No, not box, but I thought it was like a sale thing.
Actually, fun fact, the reason it's called Boxing Day is...
Barb's was kind of right. Originally it was supposed to be about giving gifts to the poor, but now it's about getting half-off deals at the mall.
Yeah, Boxing Day. Okay, well, good way to transition into the culture of the UK. And with that, let's bring it to our homegirl, Hannah, with the culture segment.
Hey guys, I'm back. Well, actually now, we're back. If you don't get it, I'm pregnant.
Hannah did a thing.
And Ian, he was there too. Okay, this is gonna be a heavy one because with the UK, it's almost like you're getting an economy-sized multi-package deal of culture and tradition. For one, you must distinguish between whether someone is from England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, the overseas territories, or Crown dependencies. To break it down a little easier, you have the Celtic areas, and then you have the Anglo-Saxon side. So let's start with a quick overview of Scotland. Cultural rule number one, do not attempt the accent. Even if you think you're good at it, just
What? What do you think you're doing? Look. I feel like if you come up and are like, oh, yeah, that'll come across as you being. But if I'm genuine, I really just want to try it, you know?
Just don't. You're not good at it.
That was so bad.
Historically, Scotland was divided by clans, each with their own territory. Each clan even had their own plaid tartan design. And Scottish last names often have a map before it. Some very notable cultural aspects you will probably encounter.
Guys, me.
Often have a map before it. Some very notable cultural aspects you will probably encounter at some point include ceilidh dances, bagpipes. January 25th is a huge deal where they celebrate Burns Night. New Year's Eve is called Hogmanay, fireball swinging, and the first person to enter the household is considered the bringer of good luck. And the iconic New Year's song, Auld Lang Syne. You know that song. Auld Lang Syne. Who knew that's what they were saying? I was just making words up. Also, everyone in Scotland will tell you to try a deep-fried Mars bar. And now, Wales. Wales is a unique...
I just got a stomach ache thinking about that. Jeez, I have such a soy stomach.
And very underrated place. It is the land of song, poetry, but at the same time, hardcore rugby, shin-kicking dragons, and powerful castles. In Wales, the daffodil is a symbol used for women and the leek used for men. Typical emblems of the daffodil or leek are worn on St. David's Day, where people clean their rooms and are nice to one another. Are they not nice other days? You get one day a year to be nice. And speaking of which, love spoons. In Wales, traditionally, a man would carve a spoon and give it to the woman he loved. They have the Mari Lloyd celebration, where they put a horse's skull on a pole. The Don's gum. Have the Mari Lloyd celebration, where they put...
That's not nightmare fuel.
A horse's skull on a pole. The Don's Gumrye. The Ested Fod is a huge deal. Every Welsh person will bring up Tom Jones.
It's not unusual to be loved by anyone.
Moving on to Northern Ireland. This is a complicated one because it's kind of like if the UK and Ireland had a confusing baby that had an identity crisis. Avoiding all the complicated politics that go into this one. This area obviously has a more Irish Celtic influence and has a mix of Protestant Catholic peoples. This is the only place that allows people to freely choose to have either one or both citizenship of either the UK or Ireland. Keep in mind, this is not the official flag of Northern Ireland. Just watch the show Dairy Girls. It does a great job at covering the general idea of what Northern Ireland was like, especially at the end of the conflict era. England. It is in itself super complicated and culturally diverse. It is home to the monarchy, which is a vital aspect of their identity. Keep in mind, although certain individuals can be knighted for their accomplishments, it is only a recognition, not an inclusion into royalty. Generally speaking, English regional cultures are mostly Anglo-Saxon based and concentrated in 6 areas. Speaking of which, England has the widest range of classical architecture. You can find people living in Tudor-style half-timber thatched roofed homes next to Victorian, next to Georgian, next to Art Deco, all in the same block. Also, the UK loves to give regional nicknames to people. Liverpool people, Scouse. Birmingham are Broomies. Manchester is
Hornies.
Mank. Newcastle is Geordie. Sunderland is Mackin. Devon and Plymouth folk are Janners. East names to people. Liverpool people, Scouse. Birmingham are Broomies. Manchester is Mank. Newcastle is Geordie. Sunderland is Mackin. Devon and Plymouth folk are Janners. East Londoners are Cockney, and they speak in a weird codified language. Much of what might be considered English culture was spurred off by the English Renaissance. The era created some of the most renowned authors and playwrights, most notable, the man himself, William Shakespeare. As a nation, the UK was the home of many inventions and discoveries. Way too many people to mention. We'll just pop up a list here. Cinema has always been a huge part of UK culture and has been contributing to the world since 1888, when the first motion picture in the world was shot in Leeds by Louis Le Prince.
Hey, Louis Le Prince was not British, he was French.
I know, I'm just saying he made his motion picture in the UK.
D'accord, tu peux continuer maintenant.
Anywho, the fact that the American version of The Office was inspired by the UK version of The Office, and that is one of our most well-renowned television shows, is amazing. I mean, it's one of my favorite TV shows of all time.
Honestly, I think we did better though. Come on, Kevin Malone, best character.
Kevin Malone.
Michael Scott.
Our version of Dwight is way better than y'all's. I'm so sorry.
Guys, I'm sorry. Love the U.S. office. Love it. Love it. I know we got the start from you guys.
Really is. In any case, the territories and crown dependencies all have their own unique traits as well. Jersey and Guernsey and the Isle of Man each have their own languages and confusing political systems. In Gibraltar, people speak Llanito. The Pitcairn Islands has a Polynesian Creole called Pitcairn. Turks and Caicos has a Caribbean House Evolution boat party, and the Cayman Islands have an entire week dedicated to pirates. Well, that was a lot, and we didn't even cover a small fraction of everything that could be discussed with the UK culture. And of course, one huge facet of UK culture is their music. And with that, Keith is on tour. Can't leave his dream job to be here. Ugh. So let's give this segment to a British musician. Guys, say hi to David.
And we got David here. Explain who you are. Introduce yourself.
I'm a music nerd from the UK, and I have a channel called David Bennett Piano. Britain has always had a rich musical culture. We had the Elizabethan lute music of John Dowland, the grand Baroque music of Handel, and at the start of the 20th century, we had two of Britain's most influential composers, Gustav Holst and Edward Elgar. But it wasn't really until the 1960s that British music became the global cultural export that it is today. Of course, I'm talking about the British invasion, where bands such as the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, the Animals, and of course the Beatles took the world by storm. And then since that invasion, the UK has continued to contribute to global popular music. Many genres of music can trace their origins back to the UK. Heavy metal, for example, was pioneered in the early 70s by the likes of Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple, and many of prog rock's.
Led Zeppelin is British too. So many, I've said this before, it's so difficult to tell an English versus an American accent when in song, like when singing. And the amount of times that I've just had, like I just had right there. Led Zeppelin's, the amount of times that has happened, like, wait, they're British? They're British? So much of like the iconic, what I think of as like American classic rock, so many are British.
Most iconic bands hail from the UK, including Pink Floyd, Yes and Genesis. Highly successful artists have hailed from every corner of the UK. The most famous Welsh musician is probably Sir Tom Jones. Northern Ireland has Van Morrison, and Scotland's most successful musician is probably Calvin Harris. Britain has always had a strong history of folk music as well, particularly in Scotland, where Gaelic language music is still very popular, with artists like Julie Fowlis continuing the tradition today. Queen, David Bowie, George Michael, Kate Bush, Oasis, Elton John, Radiohead, Muse, Coldplay, the Spice Girls, Ed Sheeran, Adele. Ever since that British invasion in the 1960s, the UK has not stopped churning out culture-defining music, and I'm sure it will play a major part in popular music for decades to come.
Thank you, David. Actually, guys, if you didn't know, Jay is a musician. You make music as well.
Sometimes.
What are some of your biggest inspirations in music?
Is it really, really boring and dull and uninteresting if I say that my favourite band is the Beatles?
Yeah, it kind of does. Yeah.
Sorry.
Basic! Well, we covered so much in this segment. Jay, what else can we talk about in this episode?
Shall we do the friend zone?
US?
So obviously the UK has a lot of diversity, and of course it's due to their history.
As you can see, Britain has had a fair few dealings with other countries around the world, which brings us to
the animation, the motion graphic.
First of all, as a permanent member of the UN Security Council and founding member of numerous IGOs such as the G7, NATO, World Trade Organization, and Council of Europe, the UK has lots of international ties. Although the Brexit situation did cut them off from EU authority, many of the diplomatic laws and trade deals with the EU are almost exactly the same as they were pre-Brexit, and today the interaction is still there and open. It's just a little different when it comes to certain legislative issues like immigration and economic policy. This is a topic for another time. In any case, the UK has spent the last 100 years coming to terms with the fact that they were pretty much seen as the antagonist in so many independent stories across the world. Even though the empire has gone, its influence is still strongly felt around the world, with lots of other countries speaking English, playing cricket, having similar-ish systems of government, and so on. Many of these countries are members of the Commonwealth of Nations, and the monarch is still, at least in a figurehead sense, the head of state of many of them. The UK still has very close relations to the Commonwealth countries, with many of these people settling in the UK, most notably some of the largest diaspora communities from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Ghana, and the Caribbean. The UK, or England in particular, had a massive rivalry with France riddled with war for much of their history. For the last century though, especially after World War II, they've done a complete 180 and have found themselves on the same team in almost all global conflicts, and each side loves to poke fun but in a loving way at each other. Interestingly enough, the country they probably have the most in common with Ireland has had quite a few scuffles and conflict, especially before the Good Friday Agreement was signed in 1998. Today, however, you can't deny that the citizens of both countries enjoy an extremely close relationship. Many British people have Irish heritage, they intermarry quite a bit, and many have dual citizenship. Australia and Spain have the largest communities of British national residents living abroad. Australia has always been a hotbed destination for immigration for Brits seeking the warmer climate, and specifically for Spain, Ibiza is almost like a little Britain, as so many British people either go there on holiday or to move. In terms of their best friends, however, many in the UK would probably say the USA, and maybe some might include Canada. The biggest differences between the two is that the USA gained full independence through revolution, whereas Canada just kind of stayed British until they slowly over time requested to be given more and more autonomy until technically 1982 when they adopted their own constitution, but still remained under the Commonwealth. It wasn't even long after the Revolutionary War that the UK and USA quickly patched things up, having a shared language and today a population with about 11% of its people ethnically descended from British roots has not only further helped them communicate and relate culturally, but eventually they've joined in almost all major international conflicts since the mid-19th century. Today they swap each other's films, TV shows, music, and so on. And in Europe, anything USA related will typically have some kind of connection to the UK, as they kind of act as like the link between North America and Europe. Overall, the USA and UK may have started sour, but today they have never been closer.
All right, and with that, in conclusion, Jay, you are the Brit. I'm going to give this to you.
In conclusion, sorry about the empire, but basically Britain is now finding its role as a modern, progressive country that hopes to leave a good mark on the world. This flag actually makes me realise that when Brits go abroad, even though we like to claim that we're not very patriotic, you know, we go abroad and it turns out, yes, we really are. And we really care and we really do love our country. And they hate when people fly their flag upside down!
Isn't it also backwards? Everything's wrong. Well, Jay, I think there was nobody better than you to be in this episode and to co-host with me. Guys, I guess that means stay tuned. The home country, USA, is coming up next.
Good luck.
Oh, fantastic. I'm so glad Jay Foreman was on the video too. That was an amazing crossover. I love both their channels. Yeah, it was really good. I hope I didn't pause or rewind too much. Hope you guys are doing well. Would appreciate any comments at all down below. If I said anything stupid, which I probably did, or answer any of my questions, I'd really appreciate it. And yeah, hope you guys are doing well. If not, chin up. You'll be good soon. See you next time, guys. Bye.